There are faces in Hollywood that time cannot erase. Faces that shimmer like fragile constellations, illuminating the silver screen long after the final credits fade. And then, there are faces that Hollywood itself chose to forget. Among them, one stands apart: Montgomery Clift. He was not just an actor, he was a revelation. Long before the rebellious charisma of James Dean, before the raw intensity of Marlon Brando, there was Clift, a pioneer of method acting. A car crash so violent, so devastating, that it left his once flawless face disfigured. From that moment on, Clift's career and his life spiraled into a descent that no studio, no award, no adoring fan could stop. The industry that had once crowned him one of its brightest stars now recoiled. Casting directors hesitated. Producers whispered. The camera, once his most intimate ally, became his harshest judge. And Montgomery Clift, once adored for his luminous fragility, found himself trapped in a cruel paradox. His talent deeper than ever, but his reflection no longer accepted by the Hollywood dream machine. Friends and co-stars would later describe his final years as a slow suicide, a life consumed by pills, alcohol, and the haunting memory of who he used to be. His death at only 45 years old was shocking, but to those closest to him, it was inevitable, a final act in a tragedy written long before his heart stopped beating. Yet the question lingers decades later. Why did Hollywood turn its back on one of the finest actors it ever produced? Was it vanity, cruelty, or simply the unforgiving truth that in the land of illusion, beauty matters more than brilliance? Tonight, we dive into the untold story of Montgomery Clift, a man who burned too brightly, who carried too much pain, and whose face, both before and after the crash, tells the story of Hollywood's cruelest betrayal. Because this is not just a tale about fame and tragedy. This is the story of how an industry that worships beauty can destroy the very souls it pretends to adore. Before Montgomery Clift became a name whispered with reverence in Hollywood circles. Before his face lit up marquees across America, he was simply a child, fragile, restless, and strangely out of place in the world he was born into. Edward Montgomery Clift entered the world on October 17, 1920, in Omaha, Nebraska, into a family that was as complicated as the man himself would later become. His father, William Brooks Clift, was a banker, stoic, conservative, a man of numbers who valued stability above all else. His mother, Ethel Sonny Anderson Clift, however, lived in a different reality. She fancied herself a woman of refined lineage, weaving stories of aristocratic roots, of noble ties to European courts, of destinies far grander than what Omaha could ever offer. Whether these tales were true or not hardly mattered. What mattered was the atmosphere they created for young Montgomery and his siblings. The Clift children, Monty, as he would always be called, his twin sister Ethel, and their older brother Brooks, grew up not with the security of a stable home, but in a life of constant movement. Their mother, convinced her children deserved better than the confines of Midwestern normalcy, carted them from one city to another, often chasing private tutors, language lessons, and cultured environments. By the time Monty was a teenager, he had already lived in more than a dozen different places, moving between the United States and Europe. It was an unusual upbringing, one that left him both gifted and isolated. On the one hand, he was taught French, German, Italian, exposed to music, art, and literature in a way that many of his peers never were. But on the other, he lacked the grounding friendships and stability that a child craves. His mother's obsession with appearances and status instilled in him a sensitivity to how the world judged him. That pressure, subtle yet constant, would haunt him for the rest of his life. Monty was never a robust boy. His health was fragile, plagued by stomach ailments that made him shy away from sports. Pushed Monty toward the audition. What began as a casual performance soon revealed itself as destiny. On stage, the quiet, fragile boy transformed. He was alive in a way he rarely was in real life. This refusal to conform was not arrogance. It was desperation. Monty felt, deep inside, that acting was not about fame or money. It was about truth. He once told a friend, "I don't want to be a movie star. I want to be an actor." That line would follow him throughout his career, separating him from the glossy Hollywood icons of his time. The seeds of his later pain were also sown early. His mother's perfectionism left him deeply insecure about his looks, despite the fact that he was strikingly handsome. Behind the delicate cheekbones and soulful eyes was a young man who never quite believed he was enough. Add to that his own inner struggles with his sexuality, something he could never openly express in an era when such truths could destroy a career, and you have a portrait of a teenager already burdened with secrets. Still, there was light. Monty's years on Broadway were filled with triumphs. He worked alongside future legends, caught the eye of critics. But what made him different was his process. While many actors still delivered polished, theatrical performances, Monty stripped acting down to its rawest form. He immersed himself in his characters. Monty delivered what many still consider his greatest performance. As George Eastman, a poor young man torn between ambition, love, and guilt, Clift captured the torment of the American dream turned nightmare. The chemistry between him and Taylor was electric, almost dangerous. She later admitted she fell deeply in love with him during filming. Their connection would blossom into a lifelong friendship, one of the few steady anchors in his turbulent life. Audiences were mesmerized. Critics hailed him as the future of acting. Studios, sensing a new golden boy, courted him with contracts and promises of riches. Yet Monty remained stubbornly independent. He refused long-term studio deals, choosing instead to handpick his roles. He turned down lucrative offers if he felt the script was shallow. For him, and there was the secret he could never share openly, his attraction to men, a truth that had no place in 1950s Hollywood. Friends knew, lovers knew, but Monty lived in constant fear of exposure. He masked it with charm, with humor, with an endless devotion to his craft. Still, his career soared. By 1953, he had 3 Academy Award nominations under his belt and a reputation as one of the greatest actors alive. Films like From Here to Eternity, 1953, solidified his legend. Playing Private Pruitt, a stubborn soldier who refuses to box despite relentless pressure, Monty embodied defiance and dignity. The role earned him another Oscar nomination and gave the world one of the most iconic images in cinema. Clift on a Hawaiian beach, trumpet in hand, torn between love and principle. But with every triumph came an undercurrent of fragility. Unlike his contemporaries, Monty never basked in the glow of success. He remained restless, searching, perpetually dissatisfied with himself. His friends described him as intense, brilliant, but also tormented. One moment, he would be the life of the party, full of wit and warmth. The next, he would retreat into silence, drowning in self-doubt. And then, there was his physicality. Despite his striking presence on screen, Monty's health was always precarious. He suffered from chronic digestive problems, often relying on strict diets and medication just to function. The toll of constant anxiety and suppressed truth weighed heavily on him. The audience saw only the luminous star, but inside, Clift was already at war with himself. By the mid-1950s, he stood at the peak of his career. He had fame, acclaim, the respect of his peers, and the adoration of millions. But fate, as if mocking his fragile grasp on happiness, was about to intervene in the most violent way possible. One night in 1956, driving home from a dinner party at Elizabeth Taylor's house, Monty's car swerved off a dark road in Beverly Hills. The crash shattered his jaw, broke his nose, and disfigured his once perfect face. The golden boy of Hollywood was gone in an instant, replaced by a man who would spend the rest of his life wrestling with scars both visible and invisible. The rise was meteoric, but the fall, that was just beginning on the night of May 12, 1956, Montgomery Clift's life changed forever. He had just left a dinner party hosted by Elizabeth Taylor, his closest friend and co-star from A Place in the Sun. The gathering had been lively, filled with laughter and conversation. Monty, who often kept his troubles bottled inside, seemed unusually lighthearted. But as he drove his car down the winding roads of Beverly Hills, disaster struck. The details of the crash remain etched in a Hollywood legend. Monty's car veered off the road and slammed into a telephone pole. The impact was catastrophic. His face smashed against the steering wheel, his jaw shattered, his nose broken, teeth knocked out. His beautiful features, the same face that had graced magazine covers that audiences adored, that Hollywood had banked millions on, were ruined in a matter of seconds. Elizabeth Taylor, upon hearing the news, rushed to the scene. According to those who were there, she reached into his wrecked car and kept him from choking on his broken teeth and blood until help arrived. That night, she saved his life, but she could not save the man he had once been. Monty survived, but the accident marked the beginning of what friends would later call his long suicide. The surgeries restored function to his face, but not its perfection. He was left with scars, nerve damage, and a haunted expression that no makeup could conceal. His once luminous smile was gone, replaced by a stiffness that made every movement a reminder of what he had lost. For a man already fragile, already plagued with self-doubt, this was devastating. Hollywood, an industry built on appearances, reacted with cruelty. While some directors admired his resilience, others quietly closed their doors. Casting agents whispered that his beauty was gone, and with it, his bankability. The very industry that had celebrated him as a revolutionary actor now recoiled at his changed reflection. But Monty refused to give up. He returned to work with a determination that bordered on defiance. In 1958, he appeared in The Young Lions alongside Marlon Brando and Dean Martin. Though his performance was nuanced and powerful, critics could not help but comment on his altered appearance. For Monty, every review was a dagger, a reminder that no matter how deep his talent ran, Hollywood could not look past his scars. Behind the scenes, he descended further into darkness. Painkillers prescribed after the accident became a crutch. Alcohol, once a social indulgence, became a constant companion. He struggled with insomnia, depression, and a gnawing sense of futility. Friends described nights where he would sit in silence, staring into space, as if trapped in a memory he could not escape. Yet there were moments of brilliance. His role in Judgment at Nuremberg, 1961, earned him another Academy Award nomination, playing a concentration camp victim giving harrowing testimony. Monty delivered his lines with raw, trembling honesty. He appeared disheveled, broken, haunted, and for once, his real suffering aligned with the role. Critics praised his performance as one of the most authentic in cinema history. But even then, the whispers followed. Was he acting or simply unraveling on screen? Elizabeth Taylor remained his fiercest protector. When he was nearly dropped from Suddenly, last summer, 1959, she threatened to walk away unless he stayed. Taylor's loyalty kept him afloat professionally, but privately, she worried about his self-destruction. She described visiting him and finding his apartment littered with empty bottles, the air heavy with despair. The years after the accident became a slow battle against both Hollywood and himself. Each film role was harder to secure. Each performance came at greater physical and emotional cost. His once promising trajectory now seemed like a tragic countdown. By the early 1960s, Monty had become a ghost of his former self. Friends noted his frail frame, his trembling hands, the way he would hide behind sunglasses even indoors. His charisma was still there, flickering like a candle in the wind, but the fire was fading. And yet, in those brief moments when he was on set, when the cameras rolled, he still carried the magic. He still had the power to draw audiences into his fragile, wounded soul. Perhaps that was the cruelest irony of all. His talent had deepened, but Hollywood could no longer embrace it. To the industry, beauty mattered more than brilliance. And Monty's brilliance was trapped behind a face that reminded them of imperfection. In private, he was painfully aware of the clock ticking down. He once told a friend, "I feel like I'm slowly dying, and the world is just watching." It was not self-pity, but recognition of the tragic truth. The accident had not just scarred his face, it had exposed Hollywood's shallow heart. And Montgomery Clift, the man who once embodied the promise of a new kind of acting, was now living proof of what happens when beauty fades in a place that worships illusion. The fall had begun, but the end, when it came, would be even more devastating. By the early 1960s, Montgomery Clift was no longer the golden boy of Hollywood. He was something far more complicated, a man haunted by ghosts, drowning in dependency, and carrying the weight of an industry that had both created and destroyed him. If the car crash had scarred his face, the years that followed scarred his soul. The whispers began quietly, then grew into open gossip. Producers complained he was unreliable. Directors feared he might not make it through a shoot. Studio executives whispered words that, in Hollywood, are the kiss of death. Uninsurable. For Monty, every headline, every rumor was another nail in the coffin of a career he had built with such care. His struggles were not simply physical. The accident had left him in constant pain, jaw injuries that made eating difficult, nerve damage that triggered migraines, lingering muscle weakness. To dull the agony, he relied on painkillers. To silence the insecurities and loneliness, he turned to alcohol. The combination left him volatile, exhausted, and increasingly fragile. Hollywood, with its merciless gaze, did not forgive weakness. The same studios that once courted him with blank checks now saw him as a liability. Offers dwindled. Friends who had once celebrated him now kept their distance. And yet, amid the wreckage, there were flashes of brilliance that reminded the world of who he truly was. In Judgment at Nuremberg, 1961, Monty gave one of the most haunting performances of his career. His role was small, but unforgettable, a concentration camp victim testifying against the Nazis. He was nervous, broken, trembling as he spoke, but it wasn't just acting. Monty's real-life fragility bled through every word. His pain was no longer hidden. It was the performance. Critics hailed it as a triumph, and he received his 4th Academy Award nomination. But even then, some could not resist the cruel undertone. Was he brilliant or simply a man disintegrating on screen? Privately, Monty was fighting battles few could see. His sexuality, long an open secret among friends, weighed heavily on him in an era when being openly gay could destroy an actor's career. He lived in constant fear of exposure. Hollywood's hypocrisy was glaring. Studios would tolerate affairs, divorces, and scandals, but a man's love for another man was unthinkable. This forced Monty into a lonely double life, one where fleeting affairs were hidden in shadows and real intimacy was impossible. The tension only fueled his drinking and depression. Elizabeth Taylor, his closest confidant, remained fiercely loyal. She called him Monty dear and stood by him when others turned away. It was she who fought to keep him in. Suddenly, last summer, 1959, of Monty arriving hours late, of entire days lost to hangovers. On the set of Freud, 1962, directed by John Huston, the production nearly fell apart because of Monty's instability. Huston was ruthless, berating him in front of the crew, pushing him beyond his breaking point. Monty's performance as Sigmund Freud was intense, layered, and deeply human. But the toll it took was catastrophic. He fought with the studio, battled Huston, and by the end of filming, his health was in ruins. Worse still, he was broke. Years of rejecting long-term contracts and battling studios had left him financially unstable. Unlike stars who signed lucrative deals, Monty had always prioritized freedom over money. But now, with medical bills piling up and roles scarce, he found himself cornered. Friends quietly loaned him money, while Monty pretended he was fine. Pride kept him from admitting just how far he had fallen. The cruelest part of his decline was that his talent never disappeared. If anything, it deepened. His later performances carried a rawness, a stripped-down honesty that came only from living with suffering. But Hollywood didn't want raw. Hollywood wanted beautiful, bankable, safe. And Monty was none of those things anymore. By the mid-1960s, he was working less and less. His name, once a guarantee of box office success, was now a gamble studios were unwilling to take. The industry that had once hailed him as the future of acting now treated him as a relic. To many, he was a cautionary tale, a man who flew too high, burned too brightly, and fell too hard. Friends later described his final years as lonely and unbearably sad. He spent long nights alone, surrounded by empty bottles, his once vivid eyes dulled by exhaustion. When visitors came, he could still summon the old charm, quick wit, warm laughter, the spark that had once made him irresistible. But those moments faded quickly, leaving behind a man who seemed to be waiting for the inevitable. In 1966, he made what would be his final film, The Defector. Shot in Germany, it was a spy thriller that offered little of the grandeur of his earlier roles. Monty was frail, visibly weakened, but his performance carried the quiet dignity of a man who still believed in his craft. When filming wrapped, he returned to his New York townhouse, retreating further into seclusion. Those who loved him watched helplessly as he slipped away. Elizabeth Taylor called often, others visited when they could, but Monty was unreachable. His body was deteriorating, his spirit already halfway gone. One friend described it best. He was alive, but it felt like he was fading in front of us, piece by piece. By 1966, the golden boy was gone. What remained was a man broken by an industry that could not accept imperfection, by secrets he could not share, and by the weight of a face that no longer belonged to the man inside. The scandals and struggles had claimed him. And yet, in that wreckage, his legend only grew. For in Montgomery Clift, Hollywood saw not just a fallen star, but its own reflection, beautiful, fragile, and destined to destroy the very things it loved most. His fragility was evident. He was gaunt, trembling, visibly older than his 45 years. The crew whispered about his exhaustion, about the way he seemed to push through every scene with sheer willpower rather than strength. But when the cameras rolled, something remarkable happened. His eyes, though shadowed by pain, still carried the same haunting depth that had captivated audiences decades earlier. His performance was subdued, deliberate, filled with quiet dignity. For a man who had spent years consumed by chaos, it was as though he had distilled his life into one final act of control. When The Defector was completed, Monty returned to New York, retreating back in his solitude. His close circle of friends worried. They knew his body was failing, his liver ravaged by alcohol, his heart weakened, his spirit exhausted. Elizabeth Taylor, ever loyal, remained in touch, calling often, tried to lift him from the abyss. But even she admitted that Monty was unreachable. His decline was no longer a matter of if, but when. On the night of July 22nd, 1966, Monty's housekeeper, Lorenzo James, checked on him before bed. He recalled Monty lying in his room, watching television. When asked if he wanted to join friends for a party that evening, Monty shook his head. "Absolutely not," he said. "I want quiet." It would be the last thing he ever said. The next morning, James entered Monty's bedroom and found him lying motionless in bed. Monty's legend grew. He became a symbol of Hollywood's cruelty, of the way the industry devours beauty and discards imperfection. Critics revisited his films, marveling at the emotional honesty he had brought to the screen. Young actors cited him as an influence, drawn to the vulnerability that set him apart from the larger-than-life heroes of his time. Even as his own life unraveled, his career may have been cut short, his face may have been scarred, but his work remains immortal. In every frame, in every trembling glance, audiences can still feel the man who gave everything to his art, even when it destroyed him. Montgomery Clift's final years were a tragedy, but they were also a testament to resilience. He never stopped acting, never stopped searching for truth, even as the world around him crumbled. His death may have silenced him, but it also cemented his place as one of Hollywood's most unforgettable figures, a star whose light, though dimmed too soon, continues to burn across the decades. When Montgomery Clift's heart stopped beating on that July night in 1966, the world lost more than just an actor. It lost a pioneer, a man who had dared to challenge Hollywood's glossy illusions and expose something raw, trembling, and painfully human. And yet, decades later, his legacy remains both luminous and haunted, like the flicker of a candle that refuses to die, even as the room around it grows dark. Clift's influence on acting is undeniable. Long before method acting became a buzzword, before Marlon Brando electrified audiences in A Streetcar Named Desire, and before James Dean turned teenage rebellion into an art form, Monty had already planted the seeds. His performances in The Search, A Place in the Sun, and From Here to Eternity broke from the rigid theatricality of Hollywood's golden age. He didn't declaim his lines like a stage actor projecting to the balcony. He whispered them. He breathed them. He lived inside them. Clift was not just a star. He was a revolution. And yet, for all his brilliance, Monty's story remains tangled in tragedy. He never won an Academy Award, despite 4 nominations. He never found lasting love, despite craving it deeply. He never found peace with his identity. Forced to conceal his true self in an era when Hollywood's morality clauses punished authenticity more harshly than hypocrisy. The very qualities that made him great, his sensitivity, his vulnerability, his refusal to compromise, were the same qualities that left him defenseless in an industry built on artifice. Today, critics and historians often ask, what destroyed Montgomery Clift? Was it the accident, which shattered his face and body? Was it the bottle and the pills, which consumed him in the years that followed? Was it the suffocating pressure of an industry that valued beauty above truth? Or was it something deeper, a wound he carried since childhood, when his mother's obsession with status left him perpetually insecure? There are no easy answers. Perhaps it was all of these things colliding in a perfect storm. Perhaps Monty, like so many artists, was destined to burn too brightly, too quickly. But one thing is clear, his legacy endures. Film students still study his performances, marveling at how modern they feel even today. Audiences, revisiting his work, are struck by how timeless his vulnerability remains. In an age of superheroes and spectacle, Monty's quiet honesty still cuts deeper than any explosion. And then there are the personal stories, the ones whispered by those who knew him. Elizabeth Taylor, who never stopped loving him. As the reels of film continue to turn, as generations of actors chase authenticity on screen, Monty's question lingers in the shadows of Hollywood. What matters more, beauty or truth? It is a question Hollywood has yet to answer. But Montgomery Clift did every time he stepped before the camera. And that is why, even in death, he remains unforgettable.